listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.
Welcome. Feels like home to me. I hope it feels like home to you on this week's episode of On the Way Home. We have a fantastic guest. We have a lived expert and professor. Before we get to talking about Jayne and their awesome job on this podcast, I just want to tell you this podcast is brought to you by the good folks at Blue Door. Check us out at bluedoor.ca. We're doing all sorts of amazing stuff. We're housing people. We're getting people healthy. We're putting them into meaningful and well-paying employment that lifts them out of poverty. We're starting a land trust called the Housing for All Land Trust across York and Durham, and hopefully into Peel. We're expanding our construct program. So if you want a pre-apprenticeship construction social enterprise program that works and lifts people out of poverty, get in contact with us. You can always reach out to me at michael.b@bluedoor.ca. Listen, if you want to be a guest, you have something to share that can help others, you have lived experience, etc., or if you know of a guest, or you just want to give us some feedback and say the podcast could be better if you did X, Y, Z, or the podcast is awesome. We'd love to hear from you. michael.b@bluedoor.ca. Week in, week out, we are sharing. That's the whole idea of this podcast, is really to talk about what's working, what's not, and what we're doing to make things change. This week is no exception to that. I have Jayne Malenfant on, and they are a assistant professor at McGill, but I shouldn't say more importantly, but they are also a lived expert. And so we talk about, Jayne shares their journey into this work through precarious housing and all the challenges, getting kicked out of school, going back to school. And it just goes to show you, sometimes the judgment people will make when people are kicked out of school. And this is someone now who is a professor, right? I mean, it's incredible. It's not like often what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know what's happening when people at youth are precarious housing, and we judge them. I think they might be lazy or just not willing to do the work, but it's really, really hard to do that when you don't have a roof over your head and all the social supports around you, or if you have mental health challenges and nothing to help you out, especially if you're not getting good quality sleep. So Jayne courageously shares their journey into the space, into the work that they are doing now. We also talk about the work they are leading around 2S LGBTQ+ youth experiencing homelessness, some of the challenges that they face in that community. We talk about the power of stories from youth, and that how you can take those stories and look for kind of similarities, right, to see if there's a common theme. And it's not just about the numbers. Numbers matter, data matters, but mining data out of stories, Jayne talks about, which is very, very cool, and I think really moves people as well. We talk about the importance of prevention in youth homelessness, and Jayne reflects on how it might have changed their trajectory going forward, right? And then we also talk about the impact that their lived experience has had on their work that they're doing now. It's a wonderful conversation with a brilliant person who's so courageous in sharing their journey, a lived expert. And I'd love to have more lived experts sharing. It's not about what I think, what happened. It's what I know and what happened to me, and I can share that. Everyone's experience is different, as Jayne points out, but certainly, it gives you a place of common understanding and helps, I think, especially when you're doing research with young people. Without further ado, let's go to that conversation now. Jayne, I so appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
We ask everyone who comes on the show the same question because it's a little different, very personal. And the first question is, what does home mean to you?
Yeah, I think that's such a tricky question, and it's one I also ask people often. I think it means a lot of different things to different people. But for me, as someone who has had lots of different homes, but also been precariously housed for a lot of my life, home is a tricky thing to define. I still don't really know what makes home a home. I've been stably housed for a couple of years. But when I think of the times in my life that I was precarious, or even when I was stably housed, the thing that makes a home to me is community and connections. And so right now I work a lot with young people who are going through precarious housing, and that comes up a lot as well. So often I'll ask them, what does home mean to you? It might mean something different to me. And again, always come back to the idea that home is connections and relationships and the people around you.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I often talk about how it's not about the four walls, and that even when young people or anyone really, um, when we're helping them find a home, it's not just about that kind of structure. It's about what community and what are the relationships around them, right? And we see that because we have people, young people, say even in emergency housing, and they form a little community there. Then we move them out of it on their own, and it's lonely and isolated, and we wonder why it doesn't take. Well, it's they've lost those pieces that are more important than kind of the walls and the roof that keep them safe. So I love that answer. I'm hoping you. I'm looking forward to hearing as much as you're comfortable sharing. Can you walk us through kind of your life journey into the work you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So, what I'm doing now is working mostly in research and academia. I'm a professor at McGill University, I'm always very surprised that I am. I was born in Kapuskasing, Ontario, and Treaty 9 territory, but I grew up most of my teens in Saskatchewan, in Saskatoon, and around the age of 16, through a bunch of different circumstances, I ended up on my own. And I also ended up getting kicked out of school in part because I was experiencing housing precarity. And so a lot of my work today stems from my own experiences. And so during that time, I was expelled for reasons to do with what was happening with my housing situation, which happens to a lot of young people. They were kind of seeing me as a bad student. I wasn't showing up. I wasn't doing as well. I was navigating like mental health problems. And so I was kicked out of school, and I eventually went back and I got my high school. And then I ended up going to university, which again was not something that was presented to me by most adults when I was a teenager. And I've kind of been in academia ever since, always kind of waiting for them to realize I don't belong here. But have just kept going. And what drives my work is the fact that I experienced a lot of the things that I'm talking to people about firsthand. So precarious housing, educational disengagement, different forms of barriers or discrimination. I work a lot with queer youth. And so most of my peers and myself were queer youth while we were navigating precarity together as a teen. And so these experiences brought me to the work that I do today, but I don't think I realized that until fairly recently. I was just kind of keeping my head down and going forward and trying to get whatever opportunities I could. And I loved learning. And so, that's what has brought me to the work that I do today, particularly around housing. I was really lucky during my master's, which again, I got a scholarship and was like, why am I at York University? But I was happy to be there, and I got to do work with the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness and work with Stephen Gates there. And I realized homelessness is something people research and people are talking about. And I didn't realize that when I was a young person. I didn't know anyone was thinking about the things we were going through. So now I try to do that for youth and adults that I work with.
That's so cool, and thank you for sharing that. I think for people to understand too that, yeah, when you are precariously housed, so many youth, it's a, how do you, if you're not getting good quality sleep, if you don't have the supports wrapped around you, and if you don't have that kind of family to support you when you have challenges, how do you stay in school, right?
Yeah, and I work with educators a lot, and I still have to sometimes say, maybe you think this student is acting disrespectfully, but what if you had slept outside last night or had not slept at all or were staying in a shelter or hadn't eaten or don't know where your next meal is going to come from? It's really hard to just sit and do math exercises or things that seem to have no bearing on your actual survival that you're trying to figure out. And so, so much of my work is led by that, but I also think things look different than they did. I'm not that young anymore. Things look different than they did when I was in high school. So young people are navigating even more things as they're precariously housed and trying to go to school.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just the whole social media piece too, and how that kind of affects mental health, and students who have lived through the pandemic, and kind of social isolation, all those different things. Have educators been open to this? Are they understanding that, do you think? Or
Yes, I think that often it's not something that people in education, and I'm in the faculty of education, are thinking of until someone brings it up. But many educators are seeing signs in their class. They might not know that they might be symptoms of homelessness, but they know something is up. And I think that they want to support more often than not, but they might not know how, and they might not know exactly what's going on. And so a lot of my work is trying to say, okay, this is what homelessness is. This is not something you've maybe thought about in your teacher training. This is what it is. This is what it might look like. This is how you might be thinking of responding. But also, a lot of educators just don't have the resources to be acting in the ways that I think young people need them to be, which is no fault of theirs. But I think it was the same thing when I was young. You know, I did have teachers who saw that something was up and they, you know, cut me some slack, or they talked to me as best they could, but I don't think they often ever thought what was happening was happening. They knew something was wrong or off, but I don't think they often know the extent that young people are struggling.
For sure. And with class sizes too, right? Like the size they are, how do you pay attention to,
Mm-hmm.
I think, with teachers? And what drove you? Like you returned and did that. And there's so many, I've worked over the years with youth experiencing homelessness at 360 Kids. And sometimes it broke my heart because some of these kids, well, a lot of them are brilliant. And I'm like, man, they're going to lose out on opportunities because they haven't gone back like you did. And they're going to be frustrated. And I remember saying that to one of them, like, dude, you got to go back and get the piece of paper. You're going to be mad that people not as bright as you are going to get the opportunities you should get. Like, what drove you to go back? How did, like, what was the kind of turning point for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it in two ways. So one is that, and I work a lot around prevention. I think I actually, when I started experiencing precarity, I had a lot of protective factors in place that meant that it didn't last that long. You know, I still had a relationship with my family, even if they were far away. You know, I was pretty good at school already. It was a natural kind of fit for me. And that's not the case for a lot of young people I work with. And so for me, I liked being in school. I thought it was an opportunity to go back to school. But I also work with youth who are really smart and they have no interest in going to school. And so I try to respect that too and say, okay, well, if this trajectory isn't what you want to be doing, what does that look like for you? And how can we foster your strengths in that? And unfortunately, like you said, sometimes if young people don't have that piece of paper, at least high school, they're not even going to be considered. And so I try to have practical conversations with them that say, you know, even if you never want to go to university, like just think and look around, because while you might not want to do that and that's your choice, you should at least have the opportunity to consider it. And so for me, I think it was just survival. I was like, what are the things I can do? And I took out way too many loans to go back. I had no funds to do it. But I was like, well, I'll figure it out when I figure it out. And so I was so excited to be at university when I got there because it was never presented to me as an option by my schools. My family was like, you can do anything you want. But yeah, so I think it's just not seen as an option for a lot of young people, unfortunately, still. But it's so necessary to getting access to anything in our society today.
Absolutely. Now, um, talk to me about how you touched on it, but how does it influence your lived experience? And I'll call you, it's okay, I'll call you a lived expert, but
Mhm.
it, how does that influence the work that you do day in, day out?
Yeah, so everything. It influences everything. Not in that I always work from my own experience, but I kind of focus on three things in my work. And the first is considering how lived experience and lived expertise shapes housing research, homelessness research, advocacy, action, organizing around this topic. Because I think more and more we are seeing people like me in spaces of research, of advocacy. Like when I started doing this kind of work, I was often the only person with lived experience at the table, and I don't think that's the case anymore. And so I do a lot of work trying to think with other live experts how we bring ourselves into things, but also how we're using our skills and knowledge we learn through our experiences to push towards more knowledge. So, you know, can I put my lived experience in conversation with theory or research or data or other people's lived experience so that I can learn more about what's happening? I also I work a lot with, as I mentioned, I think Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus communities in particular, who often have unique experiences of homelessness. And so I'm a non-binary person, I'm a queer person, and so that didn't totally shape my lived experiences, but it really shaped other people's lived experiences. And so I'll bring parts of my own knowledge into how I work with people there, where we have some similarities and we can draw on those. Um, yeah, and so I see it as a starting place for me. It's not something I kind of want to bring in as like an object or something to say like this is what happened to me and that's where we'll leave it. And I try to encourage other folks to also do that with their stories. I think stories are so important and they tell us something really important about how homelessness happens. And I think the more stories we can put in conversation together, the more we can start actually piecing out like, okay, well, there's something systemic here because everyone is experiencing it in this way. Or there's something systemic in that some people are never experiencing something in this way and some people always seem to be. And so I use my lived experience as one form of knowledge amongst many to kind of do whatever I can to make moves around preventing homelessness, preventing youth homelessness. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it certainly when you're talking to youth, it's fun. So if I approach a group of youth, usually they shut down immediately because I give off a cop vibe, and they've told me that.
I
Or I
don't.
get that. But it is that trust that you build and move through. And I think you mentioned so work with the 2S LGBTQ plus community youth. I know in York region we had two studies. We had one from Seneca that said, talked to a bunch of youth from the community, and they said, we just don't feel safe with us out there. We need this kind of different set of supports we need. Everyone was great, and then nothing was done with that. Then Dr. Alex Abramovich did another study. And that's when it got to the second one where I said to my team, I said, what are we doing this work for if we're never going to act on it?
Mm-hmm.
And so we did. We did enough funding. We acted. We've got something now called Inclusion. It's a home in York region, semi-independent with some supports that the youth design, right? And with staff from the community. And so and I don't say that to just talk about Blue Door, but how important, is it for people to understand that supports are a little different? And what have you seen or what are you hearing from youth from the 2S LGBTQ plus community?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand. And I actually think in my experience in my work, I've seen supports similarly for youth, like in Quebec, get a lot better in the last few years. So I work with Dans la Rue, which is an organization here, and their supports for queer and trans youth are incredible. They've really taken something that young people were saying was missing and run with it in a way that I think is shaped by youth in ongoing ways and their needs. I haven't seen this happen with adults. I work with queer and trans adults as well, and often people are like, "Okay, well, you're maybe like 24 now. You can just like take care of yourself." And so that's somewhere I'm working a lot more. But I have seen, I think, like Alex's work, other folks' work on this has. I've seen it taken up in ways that I haven't necessarily seen other research taken up, and I don't know what it is, but I really like it. Why this group in particular? And obviously, US LGBTQ youth still struggle with very unique circumstances, and they're still more likely to experience homelessness. But the fact that they don't have to, try to question, oh, should I go to the men's shelter, the women's shelter, the youth shelter, like where can I go, that we actually have supports that allow them to choose what they need is incredible to me. And it shows how research can really influence practice and how young people's experiences can influence how we support them when we listen to them. And so it's a place where I've seen really great changes in the last few years around agency supports and also peer work. Hiring more queer and trans workers to work with queer and trans youth makes a huge difference. Young people have said, when I see someone who looks like me, not just in the 2S LGBTQ community, but also Black youth in Montreal, Indigenous youth, to be able to see someone who you can culturally connect with or connect across experience is also a game changer. And we're seeing more and more of that here too, which is very exciting to me.
Very positive, for sure. We talked, just going to touch on prevention. Why, from a lived experience perspective, uh, why, why is the focus of prevention so important as we look to end and support youth experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, I mean, I think for those of us who have lived experience, we know what the stakes are. So we know why prevention is so important. If I if something had happened before, and I can think of key moments where something could have gone differently, where, someone could have acted differently, or there could have been a support in place. I was in school and I was certainly showing signs that I, had been wearing the same clothes for days, or I was self-harming, or I wasn't sleeping, or something where someone could have done something differently. Um, and young people share this as well. But the thing is, once someone experiences homelessness, the amount of labor they have to do to just survive, the amount of difficult experiences you have to navigate. I'm in my 30s now, and I'm still trying to heal and recuperate from things that happened to me when I was younger. So I think the costs, in terms of like financial costs of what we have to do when someone enters crisis and we respond then, is significant. But the cost to us as people, people in our community, when they have to be navigating these really difficult things and every door is closed until they're homeless enough and then they can get access to services. Yeah, we know that cost, and we know that sometimes it's a life or death thing. That prevention actually is something that can save people in our community, before they ever have to experience these things. And I also think, when I look at prevention, so a lot of the prevention I work around is in schools. So how can schools be thinking of, how can we resource schools to be acting, before someone experiences homelessness? And a lot of that is also going back to this idea of community. What makes us feel like home? It's building relationships between educators and frontline workers in their communities, or community organizations, or cultural organizations, or students themselves and their families. And so a lot of what we're seeing around prevention is also resourcing and building relationships so that people have that community that they can call home. And I think that's just a benefit, regardless, if that young person maybe wouldn't have experienced homelessness, to have those supports there just in case, because you're seeing a chance that it could happen, isn't a bad idea.
What in your work and in your research, what have you seen prevention wise that is making a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think school-based programming can be huge, and we know this from our colleagues in Australia, and upstream programs around Canada. I think the things that we see in these types of programs that are based in schools tell us that there's something really important that can happen there. Right now, a lot of responses from schools are to call the child welfare system, and we know that that is a problematic response for a lot of young people. And so like, I really think education, both in institutions of schooling, but also just education broadly, like working with young people to, teach them their rights, or teach them about things that they're interested in. If school isn't the place for it, that's the place where I see prevention working well. And what young people have said in our work, and I work with peer researchers, is that they just want to be seen and believed. They want adults in their life to believe them when they say that they need something, and not say,
Yeah.
"Oh no, what you actually need is this thing over here." So I see prevention as really fruitful in places like schools, but I also just see that, again, it comes down to relationships and people just believing youth to be experts in what they're navigating. Which seems simple, but seems to be really difficult to institutionalize in any way. Um, but yeah, so I mean, I think in terms of prevention as well, I see a lot of really cool things around, considering different family structures and different, support needs. This is something that I think people have been wary of thinking like, oh well, we just need to keep people in families, or we just need to take people out of families. And now I'm seeing, especially with queer and trans youth, expansive conversations happening around what a family is, and what, it means to keep people connected to the supports they have in their lives. And I think that's really exciting too.
Yeah, very much so for sure. And you mentioned before, I wanted to come back to it too, that I think, when you put up a bunch of numbers, you're like, oh, but when you actually tell the story and humanize it, all right, where people are like, wow, that's a person and that's what they're going through. And that's what, and I find even when we're going out to talk about it, I can put up stats, but for a lot of people, they're like, oh, I don't know, sounds like a lot. Like, is that a bad, like good? But when you tell the stories and make it human, and so people can actually, um, internalize it too, right? It's so important to hear the stories of young people. It's very heartbreaking to hear some of them, right? Because so many, as you mentioned, the child welfare system, have not been supported, and then the people that were supposed to kind of be there for them always were not, and they were on their own at an early age, right? And that kind of trauma that comes with them. Now, you were recently part of the International Youth Homelessness Prevention Conference. How did that go?
I think it went really well. It was a whirlwind. It was very busy, but I think it was a very cool meeting of researchers, young people, people doing frontline work that I don't usually get to get together with at such a scale from different countries, from different spaces across Canada. And I think it went really well. I was really lucky that I got to facilitate an opening panel with people with lived experience of youth homelessness, which is my favorite thing to do because of exactly that. And they did bring stats sometimes, but they couched it in their knowledge of, working in community from their firsthand experiences. And again, having different ways of talking about this, I think really set the ground for a conference where we could learn from young people, from community workers in a really cool way.
Coming out of that conference, doing the work you're doing, what are your hopes for the future? What would you love to see in the next few years?
I think, again, that conference, we just kept coming back to the fact that we need space to talk and reflect and learn from each other. It was such a rare space, especially for people who are finding, they're just working in survival mode. Workers, sometimes even academics are like, I have no time to do anything. And so what I'm really hoping for in the future is to continue to build spaces where young people, people with lived experience, researchers, and people who are serving these communities or part of these communities can get together and be reflecting on our practice in meaningful ways. And I think that's it. You mentioned, the power that stories can have. I think actually being able to be at a table on a regular basis and hearing like, you're using this service. What are you seeing? Like, where could we do better? Where what's working well? How could we maybe, speak to people in another place that are struggling to share that? So I'm just excited to continue having spaces where youth and people with lived experience are leading the conversation, but we're working collaboratively together to be thinking of youth homelessness prevention, housing justice, all of these things. That's the kind of work that drives me. And that's the kind of work I learn the most from. And so I hope we can continue to have more opportunities and spaces like that.
Oh, amazing. So if people want to connect with you, or if they want to see the work that you're working on, that kind of thing, where can they find you?
I'm really hard to find because I don't have social media, but anyone, anytime can always email me. It's my name with a period in the middle of Jayne Malenfant at McGill.ca. You can also just look me up. I'm reachable, and I use email because I'm kind of a grandpa. But I would love anyone ever like talking about this stuff is my jam, and I love connecting with other people. I also have monthly meetups here in Georgia, Montreal for people who do housing stuff. Like I'm all about connecting. So if people want to email me, that's about it. I guess I should get some other way to.
No, I actually think that's quite healthy. I think more young people should pay attention to, because I mean, as much as sometimes social media, you say keeps you connected, it also the harms that it does for so many young people, I think outweigh the good. So good for you for for being a leader in that way. I'm sure people can reach out and they will find you. Jayne, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for all you do for youth and homelessness prevention, and the list goes on and on. So appreciated. And anytime you have research you want to come on and share, you're welcome back.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michael.
Take care.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Michael Braithwaite.